Hostels are supposed to be one of the cheapest and easiest ways to travel. You book a bed, throw your bag down, and meet other travelers from around the world. Most people who stay in hostels are just like you, young, adventurous, trying to see the world without emptying their bank account. But every once in a while, something happens in one of those hostels that no traveler ever forgets. Not because of a bad experience or a rude roommate, but because of something genuinely terrifying. Tonight, I have 3 true stories from real people who stayed in hostels and encountered something that still haunts them to this day.
Our first story comes from a solo traveler named Daniel. He was 24 years old at the time and was backpacking across Eastern Europe alone. He had been traveling for about 3 weeks when he arrived in Budapest, Hungary. It was late September. The weather was starting to turn cold, and he was exhausted from an overnight train ride. He had booked a bed in a mixed dormitory hostel right in the heart of the city. The place had decent reviews online, nothing fancy but clean enough and cheap enough for a backpacker on a tight budget. When he checked in, the front desk girl told him he was in room 7, a 6-bed dormitory on the 2nd floor. She handed him a small key for his locker and pointed him toward the stairs. Daniel hauled his backpack up the narrow staircase and found room 7 at the end of a short hallway. When he pushed the door open, the room was dark and quiet. He could make out the shapes of bunk beds, 3 sets total, and he could hear the soft breathing of at least 1 or 2 people already asleep. He used his phone's flashlight to find his assigned bed, which was a top bunk near the window. He noticed the bottom bunk directly below his was empty. He climbed up as carefully and quietly as he could, stuffed his backpack under the thin pillow, and pulled the rough blanket over himself. Within minutes, the exhaustion from the train ride caught up to him, and he was out.
He woke up suddenly at around 3 in the morning. Not from a noise exactly, more like that feeling you get when you just know something is off. The room was completely silent, no breathing sounds, no shifting of sheets, just dead silence. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had pulled him out of sleep. Then he heard it, a very slow, deliberate sound coming from directly below him. Someone was in the bottom bunk. The mattress was creaking in a rhythmic way, not like someone tossing and turning in their sleep, but like someone sitting completely still and then shifting their weight very slowly and very deliberately, over and over, like they were rocking.
Daniel slowly turned onto his stomach and looked over the edge of his bunk. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness enough to make out shapes. The bottom bunk, which had been empty when he fell asleep, was now occupied. A man was sitting completely upright on it, not lying down, not reading, just sitting there in perfect silence, completely still except for that slow rocking motion that was barely noticeable now that Daniel could see him. Daniel pulled himself back from the edge and lay flat on his back again. He told himself there was a completely normal explanation. Maybe the guy had just checked in late and hadn't been assigned a specific bed. Maybe he had a bad back and preferred sleeping sitting up. Maybe he was jet-lagged and couldn't sleep. Daniel ran through every rational explanation he could think of. But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself everything was fine, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Because in all of his rationalizing, he kept coming back to one simple thing he could not explain. The room had been silent when he woke. No door opening, no footsteps, no sound of someone climbing into the bunk. The man had appeared below him in complete silence. Daniel decided the safest thing was just stay still and wait for morning. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. That is when the rocking stopped. Complete stillness from below. Daniel held his breath. Then, slowly, very slowly, he felt the bunk bed frame begin to vibrate. Not shake, vibrate. Like fingers were being dragged along the metal frame underneath his mattress, starting from the foot of the bed and moving deliberately upward toward the head where Daniel was lying. He pressed himself against the wall and grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. Daniel turned his phone flashlight on and pointed it downward over the edge of the bunk. The man was no longer sitting against the wall. He was now lying flat on his back. But his face was turned upward and he was staring directly at the underside of Daniel's mattress. His eyes were wide open. The second the flashlight hit him, the man did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He simply turned his head slowly and looked directly up at Daniel. He had a completely blank expression, no emotion at all. He just stared. Daniel asked him loudly what he was doing. The man did not respond. He just kept staring with those wide, expressionless eyes.
Daniel did not wait another second. He grabbed his backpack and his shoes and dropped down from the bunk as fast as he could. The man in the bottom bunk did not move or say a single word the entire time. He just kept his head turned, watching Daniel with those empty eyes. Daniel did not look back. He walked fast out of the room, down the stairs, and straight to the front desk where a different staff member was now on duty. He told the man exactly what happened. The staff member looked genuinely disturbed and immediately called someone on his radio. Daniel waited in the lobby.
2 staff members went up to room 7. Daniel waited downstairs. About 10 minutes passed before one of them came back down alone. His expression was unreadable. He told Daniel that when they entered the room, the bottom bunk was empty. There was no man. The other guests in the room were all asleep and had apparently not been disturbed. There was no sign that anyone had been in that bunk at all. No indent in the mattress, no sheets pulled back, nothing. The staff member asked Daniel if he was sure he hadn't been dreaming. Daniel told me that question made him feel sick because he knew with absolute certainty that he had not been dreaming.
The staff let Daniel check the security footage from the hallway outside room 7 for that night. The footage showed Daniel entering the room. It showed one other guest entering earlier in the evening. It showed absolutely no one else entering or leaving that room the entire night. Not a single person. Daniel watched the footage 3 times. The hallway camera had a clear view of the only door in and out of that room. Whatever that man was, or whatever Daniel saw, it had not used the door.
Daniel spent the rest of the night in the hostel common room with every light on. He did not sleep. When morning came and other guests started filtering downstairs for breakfast, he asked a few of them casually if anything strange had ever happened in room 7. One girl who said she had stayed there 2 nights before him went very quiet when he asked. She told him that on her first night, she had woken up to the feeling of someone watching her from across the room. When she looked up, she said she saw the outline of a man sitting completely upright on one of the empty bunks, just staring in her direction. She had convinced herself it was a dream, until Daniel described the exact same thing.
Daniel checked out of that hostel that same morning. He told me he has traveled to over 20 countries since then and has stayed in dozens of hostels. But he has never once booked a bottom bunk since that night in Budapest. He said it is not something he can fully explain and not something he expects anyone to fully believe, but he knows what he saw, and whatever was lying in that bottom bunk staring up at him through the dark, it was not a guest.
Our second story comes from a woman named Sarah. She was 26 at the time and was traveling through Southeast Asia on a solo trip she had been planning for over a year. She had quit her office job in London, bought a one-way ticket, and decided she was going to spend 3 months traveling through Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. She was about 6 weeks into her trip when she arrived in Chiang Mai, Thailand. It was a humid evening in July, and the streets were buzzing with tourists and food vendors. She had booked a bed in a small hostel just off the main road, a place with good reviews and a rooftop common area that looked beautiful in the photos. She was excited. She had no idea that the next 48 hours in that hostel would be the most terrifying experience of her entire life. The hostel was run by a local family. The man at the front desk was friendly and spoke decent English. He checked Sarah in quickly and handed her a key to a private room. She had upgraded from the dorm at the last minute because she was feeling exhausted and wanted her own space. The room was small but clean. A single bed, a ceiling fan, a tiny bathroom, and one window that looked out onto the back alley behind the building. The man told her breakfast was served at 8 a.m. on the rooftop and that the front door was locked at midnight. Sarah thanked him, went upstairs, showered, and fell asleep quickly. The first night passed without any problems at all. It was on the second evening that things started feeling wrong. Sarah had spent the day exploring the city and came back to the hostel around 9 p.m. When she reached the third-floor hallway, she noticed that the room directly across from hers, which had been empty the night before, now had its door closed. She could hear movement inside. She did not think much of it at first. New guests had checked in, completely normal. She went into her own room and started getting ready for bed. But around 11 p.m., just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard something that made her eyes open immediately. Coming from the room across the hall was a sound she could not identify at first. It was low and rhythmic, almost like humming, but it was not musical. It sounded more like someone repeating the same low tone over and over without stopping for 20 minutes straight.
Sarah lay in bed listening. The humming did not stop. It did not change pitch or rhythm. It was completely mechanical in its consistency, and that was what made it so deeply unsettling. No human naturally hums the same single tone for 20 minutes without variation. She got up and pressed her ear gently against her own door. The sound was clearer now. It was definitely coming from directly across the hallway. And underneath the humming, she could now hear something else, a very faint tapping sound, like fingernails on a hard surface, slow and deliberate. She stepped back from the door. Her heart was beating fast now, and she could not explain why. The sounds themselves were not violent or aggressive, but something about the combination of them felt deeply wrong in a way she could not put into words. Sarah went downstairs to the front desk. The same man who had checked her in was still there. She told him about the sounds coming from the room across the hall. His reaction surprised her. He did not look concerned or dismissive. He looked uncomfortable. He told her that room had not been rented out. She told him she could clearly hear someone inside. He said it was probably just the pipes or the building settling at night. Old buildings made strange sounds. She pushed back and told him it was definitely not pipes. It was a human sound.
He smiled politely and told her he would check on it in the morning. His smile did not reach his eyes. Sarah went back upstairs feeling more unsettled than before.
She was back in her room for maybe 15 minutes when the humming stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sound itself. Sarah sat up in bed and stared at her door. A few seconds passed, then she heard the door across the hallway slowly open. She could hear the old hinges creaking, then footsteps in the hallway, slow ones. She watched the gap under her door. She could see the shadow of feet stopping directly in front of her room, standing there, not moving, just standing. She reached for her phone on the nightstand as quietly as she possibly could. The shadow under the door did not move for a full 2 minutes. She timed it. 2 full minutes of someone standing completely still directly outside her door in the middle of the night. Then came 3 slow knocks on her door. Sarah did not move. She did not breathe. She sat in the center of her bed with her phone gripped in both hands. The knocks came again. Same rhythm, same pace, completely calm, not aggressive, not urgent. Just 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world and was not going anywhere. Sarah typed a message to a friend back in London, telling her exactly what was happening and what room she was in. She did not know why she did that exactly. She said it was just an instinct, like some part of her brain wanted someone in the world to know where she was in case something happened. The knocking stopped. The shadow under the door disappeared. Footsteps moved back across the hallway. She heard the door across from hers close again. Then silence. Sarah sat completely still for a long time before she finally exhaled. She thought about leaving the hostel right then, in the middle of the night, but she was on the 3rd floor of a locked building in a city she did not fully know. She decided staying in her locked room was safer than going out into that hallway. She pushed the small wooden desk chair under her door handle the way she had seen people do in movies and sat back on the bed with every light in the room turned on. She did not sleep that night. When daylight finally came, Sarah grabbed her bags, packed everything as fast as she could, and went straight downstairs. The man at the front desk was replaced by a young woman Sarah had not seen before. Sarah told her everything that had happened during the night. The woman listened carefully. Then she did something the man the night before had not done. She went upstairs with Sarah and unlocked the room across the hall. When the door swung open, Sarah saw that the room was completely empty. No bags, no personal items, no sign that anyone had been staying there. But on the floor directly in front of the door, arranged in a perfectly straight, horizontal line, were 7 small stones, smooth and dark, placed with obvious, deliberate care, evenly spaced, like someone had arranged them very carefully and very intentionally. The young woman at the desk stared at those stones for a long time without saying anything. Sarah asked her what they meant. The woman was quiet for a moment and then said something that Sarah has never forgotten. She said that in certain local beliefs, a line of stones placed at a threshold is a way of marking a space, of claiming it. She would not say anything more specific than that. She just picked the stones up one by one and put them in her pocket. Then she turned to Sarah and told her very calmly that she should check out today, not as a suggestion, more like a quiet warning. Sarah did not argue. While Sarah was waiting for a taxi outside the hostel, she got talking to 2 other guests who were also checking out that morning.
a couple from Germany who had been staying on the second floor. She mentioned what had happened on the third floor. The man looked at his girlfriend and then back at Sarah. He told her that they had heard something strange the night before too. Not humming, something different. He said it sounded like someone walking very slowly up and down the staircase between floors for most of the night. The footsteps would go up, pause, then come back down, pause, then go back up again, over and over, all night. They had assumed it was just another restless guest until Sarah told them that according to the front desk, the third floor had only one occupied room that night, hers.
Sarah left Chiang Mai that same morning on the first bus she could find heading south. She told me she is not a superstitious person. She does not believe in ghosts or the supernatural. She has a rational explanation for almost everything in her life. But she said that when that young woman picked up those stones from the floor and told her to leave, something in her gut told her not to ask any more questions, just go. She went, and she finished the rest of her Southeast Asia trip and had a wonderful time, but she has never gone back to Chiang Mai. And she said whenever she books accommodation now anywhere in the world, she always requests a room that does not have another room directly across from it.
Our third and final story comes from a man named Marcus. He was 28 years old at the time and was on a solo backpacking trip through South America. He had been traveling for about 2 months when he arrived in Buenos Aires, Argentina. It was a Friday night in November, and the city was alive with energy. Music was coming from every direction. Streetlights reflected off the wet cobblestones from an earlier rain. Marcus was in good spirits. He had just come from a beautiful week in Patagonia and was planning to spend a few days in Buenos Aires before flying home. He had not booked accommodation in advance because he preferred to find places when he arrived. That habit had never caused him any problems before. That night, it almost cost him everything.
Marcus checked 3 hostels before finding one with availability. The city was packed that weekend because of a local festival. The third hostel he walked into was called Casa del Viajero, House of the Traveler. The building was old, the kind of old that felt heavy when you walked through the door. The ceilings were high and water-stained. The walls were thick stone. The man behind the desk was heavy-set and spoke almost no English. Through broken communication and a translation app, Marcus established that there was exactly 1 bed left in the entire building. It was in a basement dormitory. The man pointed downward when he said the word basement. Then he said something else in Spanish that Marcus did not fully catch. He asked the man to repeat it. The man just shook his head slightly and handed him the key. The staircase leading down to the basement was narrow, and the walls on either side were bare stone. The air got noticeably colder with every step down. Marcus counted 14 steps before reaching the bottom. The dormitory was a long rectangular room with 6 bunk beds arranged in 2 rows. The ceiling was low. A single long fluorescent light ran the length of the room, and it flickered occasionally. There were no windows. The only way in or out was the staircase he had just come down. 5 of the 6 bunk beds were occupied. Bags were stuffed under mattresses, and clothes were draped over bed frames. The other guests were all asleep. Marcus found his assigned bunk, bottom bunk at the very far end of the room, made as little noise as possible getting settled, and lay down. The fluorescent light above clicked off automatically after a few minutes, leaving the room in absolute darkness. Marcus lay in the darkness, trying to sleep, but something was bothering him. At first, he thought it was just the unfamiliar environment. No windows meant no sense of the outside world at all. No passing headlights, no distant traffic sounds filtering in. The room was completely sealed from everything outside. But it was more than that. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he began to notice something.
Of the 5 other occupied bunks in the room, he could not hear a single person breathing. No shifting, no soft snoring, nothing. He lay completely still and listened as carefully as he could. The room was so silent that he could hear his own heartbeat. 5 people in a room and not one single sound from any of them. Not one.
Marcus slowly reached for his phone and turned the flashlight on. He kept the beam low and swept it carefully across the room, trying not to disturb anyone sleeping. What he saw made the breath catch in his throat. Every single occupied bunk in the room, all 5 of them, had a person lying completely flat on their back, arms at their sides, eyes closed, faces pointed straight up at the ceiling. Not one person was curled on their side or stomach the way most people naturally sleep. Every single one of them was in the exact same position, flat on their back, arms straight down, like they had all been arranged that way.
Marcus sat up slowly. He swept the flashlight toward the far end of the room, toward the staircase that was the only exit. There was someone standing at the bottom of the stairs, not coming down, not going up, just standing at the base of the staircase, completely still, facing the room. The flashlight beam caught them only partially. Marcus could see it was a person, tall and thin, wearing dark clothing. Their face was angled downward slightly, so he could not see their features clearly. He could not tell if it was a man or a woman. He could not tell if it was one of the other guests or someone who had come down from upstairs. What he could tell was that this person was standing completely still and had been standing there long enough that none of the other guests had reacted to them at all.
Marcus called out, asking if everything was okay. His voice came out steadier than he expected. The figure did not respond, did not move, did not look up. Marcus called out again, louder this time, asking if the person needed help. Nothing, not even a flinch. By this point, Marcus was sitting fully upright on his bunk with his feet on the cold stone floor. He looked around at the other guests, expecting that his voice had woken at least one of them. Not one of them had moved. All 5 were still lying flat on their backs in that same rigid, identical position. He looked back toward the staircase. The figure was still there. Same position, same stillness, like a statue someone had placed at the bottom of the stairs.
Marcus made a decision. He was not going to sit at the far end of a windowless basement room and wait to find out what was happening. He stood up slowly. He kept his flashlight pointed at the figure the entire time. He started walking toward the staircase, toward the figure. He told me that every instinct he had was screaming at him to stop. But the staircase was the only way out, and he was not going to stay in that room another minute. As he got closer, the figure still did not move. Marcus was now close enough to see more detail. The person was a man, older. His head was still angled down. His hands were at his sides. His chest was moving. He was breathing, but barely, slow and shallow, like someone in a very deep sleep, standing completely upright.
Marcus stopped about 2 feet away from the man. He said the man's eyes were not fully closed. They were open just slightly, enough to see a thin sliver of white. His breathing was so slow and shallow that if Marcus had not been looking directly at his chest, he would have thought the man was not breathing at all. Marcus said, "Excuse me," firmly. Nothing. He reached out and touched the man's shoulder. The second he made contact, the man's eyes snapped fully open. He looked directly at Marcus. His expression was completely blank for one long second. Then something shifted in his face,
like he was slowly coming back from somewhere very far away. He blinked several times rapidly, looked around the room with confusion, and then looked back at Marcus and said one word in accented English. He said, "sleepwalking." The man, who turned out to be a guest from Romania named Emil, seemed genuinely disoriented. He looked down at his own feet as if surprised to find himself standing. He looked at the staircase behind him and then back to Marcus with an expression of confused embarrassment. He explained in broken English that he had a history of sleepwalking, that it happened more when he was in unfamiliar places. He apologized quietly and shuffled past Marcus back to his bunk. Marcus watched him lie down. Within 30 seconds, Emil was completely still again, flat on his back, arms at his sides, exactly like the others. Marcus stood there in the middle of that basement room at 3 a.m., surrounded by 5 people all lying in identical positions, and tried very hard to convince himself that everything had a rational explanation. He almost managed it. Then he looked at the staircase again.
At the top of the staircase, just barely visible at the edge where the basement light faded into the darkness of the floor above, were a pair of feet. Someone was standing at the top of the stairs looking down, not moving, just standing there looking down into the basement. Marcus had come down 14 steps when he arrived. He could now see that whoever was standing at the top was not staff. They were not wearing shoes. Bare feet on the cold stone floor at the top of the stairs at 3 in the morning, just standing there looking down at the room below. Marcus counted to 3 and walked up those 14 steps faster than he had ever moved in his life. When he reached the top, whoever had been standing there was gone. The hallway was empty in both directions. He stood at the top of those stairs, breathing hard, and did not go back down.
Marcus spent the rest of that night in the hostel common room upstairs with his backpack on his lap and the lights on. In the morning, he went back down to the basement to collect the few things he had left by his bunk. All 6 beds were empty, neatly made, no bags, no belongings, no sign that anyone had slept there at all. He asked the man at the front desk about the other guests from the basement dormitory. The man looked at him for a long moment and then said something that Marcus has turned over in his mind every single day since. He said, "There were no other guests in the basement last night. You were the only booking." Marcus put his key on the desk and walked out into the Buenos Aires morning without looking back. He has never booked a basement room since. He has never fully stopped thinking about those 5 figures lying flat on their backs in the dark, and he has never found an explanation that truly satisfies him. Some things that happen on the road stay with you long after the trip is over, and some rooms, some places, are better left without a rational explanation.
3 hostels, 3 travelers, 3 experiences that none of them have ever been able to fully explain. Whether you believe every detail of these stories or not, the next time you throw your bag onto a hostel bunk and pull the curtain closed, just remember, you do not always know who checked in before you. You do not always know who is in the room with you. And sometimes the scariest thing in a hostel is not what is making noise in the dark. It is what is standing completely still, waiting, watching in silence.